Hello, here I'm going to explain how to set up a loan table for a simple loan. Say you're going to buy a car or you have a credit card debt, and this will even work for a house loan. So a lot of different ways to set it up. I'm going to set it up with a little extra information just for basic use of a spreadsheet and help with analysis. So I'm going to make the following columns. I want a place to keep track of the period of the loan. I want to also keep track of the date for that period that the payment gets made, the amount of the payment, how much interest we had to pay, we call that the interest amount, how much our balance was reduced by, the actual balance is, and so we're going to have columns for each of those. We're also going to want to keep track of the interest rate. We call that the APR. We'll do that off to the side here. And then we'll also look at some point a fixed payment. We'll call that PMT for payment. Cleaning this up a little bit, I'll word wrap these here so that we can narrow those columns a touch. So period, we're going to start off with a zero period. In that zero period, we have some initial amount. Like let's suppose we owe $1,000 on a credit card. Let's suppose our credit card has an APR of 12% for simplicity. It's kind of middle of the road right now, I think. And we'll worry about the fixed payment over here later. Eventually, a month later, we'll have our first payment that we're going to make. And let's suppose that's going to happen on January 25th, 2017. And we're going to make a payment of, let's say we can afford $100. So that's pretty straightforward. Where it starts to get interesting is the interest. Well, interest isn't that bad. Simple interest is just the amount in the balance times the interest rate times the amount of time that's expired. Now the interest rate here is an annual percentage rate. Since only 1 month has expired, so we're going monthly, that's 1/12 of a year. So anytime I do a calculation in a spreadsheet, I want to type equals first. And then I click on my balance. Simple interest is the balance times the rate times the time. And that's 1/12 of a year. Now, I use cell references for that. So if I double click on the interest amount, it's showing me color-coded which cells I'm referencing. And the nice thing about relative cell referencing is when I copy this interest amount formula down, instead of looking at F2, it's thinking the cell that's right to up 1. So if I copy it down to the next cell here, it's going to think go right to and up 1 and grab the new balance. On the other hand, the interest rate is not relative, it's always in the same spot. So to fix the interest rate, I'm going to copy it down. So I want to say don't mess with the 1, put a $sign in front of it. That makes it what's called an absolute cell reference. So that's simple interest with a formula that I can move up or down only. So it says $10. If the balance was formatted in dollars, then that interest amount calculation will get formatted in dollars automatically because it depends on the balance. And the spreadsheet recognizes that we probably want that to happen. You can always override that. Balance reduction. Well, what happens is the bank gets sent that $100 and it says you owe me $10 immediately in interest. That leaves $90 to reduce the balance by. So simple formula there says take the payment, subtract the interest due. Now that's relative. It's going to change every month in terms of I could make a different payment next month. The interest amount depends on the actual previous balance. So those get no $signs, they are relative. The balance is always going to be equal to the previous balance, take away whatever's left over after interest from our payment right there. And those are relative, they will change every month, no $signs. So in terms of filling things down, if I always want the payment to be 100, I have to give the computer a sample of 2 things to work with to be safe. And then you can highlight that sample of 2 things, let go of the mouse, grab the bottom right corner and fill that down as far as you want. The date needs a sample to go with. So let's see, second period is going to be 2/25/2017. And so I can fill multiple things at once as long as I have a suitable pattern the computer will recognize. So it recognized 1, 2, 3. It recognized January, February, March, April, and so on. The formulas, they're self-contained, and they only need a single one. So you can fill it down in two ways. You can grab them one at a time and fill them down. At first, you get some weird results because there's no corresponding entries. Alternatively, you can highlight a whole bunch of them and fill them down at once. And if they're right, then things should start working out. I should see that the interest amount should be dropping each month because the balance is dropping each month. Since the interest amount is that I owe on interest each month is dropping, then the amount I get to take my balance down by, the balance reduction, that should be increasing each month. And at some point, I should find that I'll get a zero balance. Here I have a negative amount because there's no payment to go with it. So I'm going to fill these down a little farther. I'm going to select 2 cells to fill down now, or 2 rows, because the 9, 10, and the dates need 2 rows to get the pattern right. That won't hurt the formulas. And so I just fill it down farther. And eventually here I can see when the balance goes negative, it means I paid too much that month. My debt is complete. So all this other stuff is extra. So we could guess I can afford $100 a month. If that's going to be the case, it's going to take me 11 months to pay this off. And my last payment's going to be a little bit less than $100. How much less? Well, $41.02 less. Another way to think about that, so let's just delete that there for a moment, is the last payment doesn't need to be $100. What does it need to be? Well, it needs to be the previous balance plus whatever interest has accumulated over that month. And if I do that and fill this payment, this balance calculation back down, I hit zero perfectly. So I had to engineer this last payment. So let's highlight that. And so here I could analyze, guessing at a payment, how long is it going to take? Now, slightly different twist on that problem. Suppose I put my payment here and I just want to refer to it. Otherwise, I have to change the payment in multiple spots. In that case, I just say, we can delete all these for a moment. Delete on the keyboard wipes out cells. I'll say for the payment, I just want the computer to look in this cell over here where I have the payment typed. Now, when I fill that formula down, it's a relative cell reference. I'm going to have a problem. It's going to say, hey, look in H3 for that payment, but there's nothing in H3. So back here, I made one mistake. This is an absolute reference. It's always in row 2 when I'm copying up and down. So I put the $sign in there, and then I fill it down, and it works out okay. Still have my negative balance at the end, so then I have to adjust this to say, take the previous balance, add the interest due, and that gives me a zero balance. So this gives me a tool, this spreadsheet gives me a tool to play around with what payment should I make. Okay, so maybe I can't afford $100. Maybe I can only afford 85. And so I try 85 and I see, ooh, that means I have to do 217 in the 11th month. I probably can't do that. But again, we could just highlight a row, 2 rows, and fill that down until we see the balance go negative, and then we can recalculate that last payment. And it's always the previous balance plus the interest due in the current month. And I can get a zero balance there. If I want all these guys to be dollars, I can highlight them all and format them, or format their reference cell, and bang. Beautiful dollars and cents. Okay, so we're going to put another twist on this. So I'm going to copy this whole sheet, Control-C on the keyboard, add a new sheet, and Control-V to paste it in. So most of the time when you get a loan, you're told you have to pay it off in, say, 12 months. So you don't get a 13th month. You can pay it off early. So let's suppose we had to get a zero balance in this last month here. What should the payment be? Well, I could keep guessing at payments till it happens, you know. That's kind of a waste of time. That's a standard calculation in the finance world. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look up a formula. When you're trying to look up formulas, there's a couple of ways to do it. You can go to the More Functions page that Google has, and you can search by topic or keyword. So I could type something in here like payments, hit enter, and then it'll give me different possible payments, PPMT, PV. Sometimes reading the description isn't sufficient to figure out which one you should get. We want the one called PMT here. Okay, so it calculates periodic payment for an annuity. What we're doing is a payoff annuity. A loan is another name for a payoff annuity. So we're going to try and use this function here, PMT. So I'm going to have the computer calculate this amount here. To do that, I start typing the formula Google recommended, PMT, and it's saying, hey, you want periodic payment for an annuity investment? Yeah, sure I do. All right, so it says, what's the rate? Key here that it doesn't tell you is it wants the periodic rate. So on my spreadsheet here, 12 is my yearly rate, but not my periodic rate. I have to divide that by 12 to change it into a monthly rate because I have periods, my months are periods. Next. It wants to know what's the number of periods, okay? That's always the number of years times the 12 months in a year. So in this case, I'm just going to type 12. I want it done in 12 periods, comma. Next thing it wants to know is the present value of this money. Now, this is for an annuity. An annuity is usually your money, a positive thing, but this is a debt. So we have to make that a negative value. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type a negative sign. Oops, come on, there you go. A negative sign, and then click on my initial balance because this is a debt for me. And then the other spots here are optional, so I close the parentheses and hit enter. Okay, and the computer says 8885 should give you a zero balance in the end. Right, and that is called an amortization payment. Okay, the PMT function produces what's called an amortization payment, and I could extend this. You know, suppose let's make one more version of this. Copy that into a third sheet. Suppose there's a bigger loan, like you're going to buy a new truck, and that new truck costs $30,000. Often when you get a loan, they'll give you options. So we're not going to pay it off in a year. That would be $2,665 a month. That's a bit much for most people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this down a bit, and I'm going to add a place for the number of years for this loan. And so, you know, $30,000 is quite a bit of money. Maybe I want 5 years to pay it off. And so I'll adjust my payment formula to use that 5 years. So the first field is the periodic interest rate. That's the APR divided by 12. The number of payments is always the number of years times 12. So I'm just going to put in here that I'm going to take 12 times my 5 years. And then it's saying, here's the balance. We have to consider that a negative because it's a debt for us. Hit enter. That means for $30,000 vehicle at 12% interest per year for 5 years, your monthly payment is $667. If you can't afford that, then buy a cheaper car, stretch it over more years, or try and get your interest rate lowered. For the table, notice we haven't hit 0. We have to continue this for 5 times 12 or 60 rows to see the net result there. So that means I need to add rows here. So let's scroll on down. And what we should find is once we accumulate 60 rows, and perfect, I get a perfectly zero balance with $667.33. So this system here gives you a place to play around with debts and periodic payments. Other things we could do is we could look at our total interest by, say, adding up the entire interest column. What did we end up paying extra for that $30,000 car because we didn't have the money up front? Computer says you paid another $10,000 for that car at 12% interest. Holy moly. Wow, that's a lot of money. Let's stick that over here. We can call that total interest. Lots of things we could play around with, calculations we can do and analyze this debt. So I hope you found this helpful. Good luck playing around with your finances. Take care.